Elizabeth Blank.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Oh, I do need a clicker. I'm Elizabeth, and I don't have a clicker. Thank you. Thank you.
I've got a clicker for you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. Let's see, now that I've got a clicker. And talk to you about something that I find to be very important. It gets a little bit of a bad rap, and I'm talking about creative ruts. But before we jump into all of the content that we're going to talk about today, I want you to think about the first 6 months or so when you really were falling in love with photography. The first time you picked up a camera and started to learn what all those little dials meant and what functions were available to you. Probably during that time, if you were anything like me, you had a love affair with it. You couldn't get enough. I know I was obsessed. I just wanted to learn more. Any moment that I had that I could learn, I was consumed with it. But then once you begin to master some of those skills and wonder a little bit less about what aperture and shutter speed mean and things like that, I think the excitement begins to wear off a little bit. And sometimes we find ourselves in creative ruts. And so I'm going to give you 10 tips today on how I combat that feeling when I am personally experiencing it. Number 1, explore new locations. Oftentimes, when we find ourselves in a rut, which is defined as feeling bored or stagnant with our work and what we're doing, we can obviously attribute that to the location. If you're constantly shooting in the same place over and over again with the same subjects, it can feel a bit cumbersome or a bit lacking. But when you expose yourself to different locations that are new, the whole world opens up, right? I mean, I flew into Vegas last night, and the airport was somewhere I had never been before, and it just had a different feel than my airport at home. So exploring new locations. In talking about that a little bit further, this image was taken on a side street in Paris one morning. I am a terrible, get jet lagged terribly. And so I find myself often up before the sun. And so I was meandering back to the hotel early one morning and just picked up my camera and captured this moment. I was really drawn to how the sun was entering the side street here. And it wasn't until I got home and started culling through those images that I realized there's a human experience no matter where you go. The fact of the matter is that this parent was taking their child to school. It was morning rush hour. And as I was sitting there culling through my images, had just done the same thing an hour before and found myself able to really connect with the driver of the Vespa. So by getting out of our locations, we still can be tied to the experiences even if we're not familiar with the location. This is another image that really drives home the point of exploring new locations for me. Because oftentimes when we find ourselves in new locations, we're really in tune with the experience that's in front of us, the scene that's in front of us. I see garage doors, I mean, how many times a day? You can't count. But when I walked by this one, I was immediately drawn to the color theory between the door and the walls, as well as the mimicked color within the vine here, how it went from green to pink as well. And in that moment, I stopped and captured it. It was a garage door, but I stopped and captured it because it meant something. Same thing here. When we find ourselves in different locations, we can really embrace the experience that others around us are having, such as these folks jumping into the ocean. And then this one as well. We're drawn to the things that we find around us. And this is my all-time favorite from one that I've taken in a location far away, because I think the juxtaposition between the street performer who's taking a break and the businessman who's obviously confused about where his life is taking him, he just kind of stood there and kept looking back and forth. And this guy's just looking at him like, I don't know what to tell you, man. But I was just watching the entire scene without being in a rush because I was finding myself with that luxury. But what I want you all to take away from this point is that you don't always have to travel very far to have that experience. That's not realistic. This image was taken less than a mile from my house in a park that I pass by multiple times a day. And in the winter, when there's not as much foliage on the trees, the light comes in beautifully over this bench. And I had always said, I'll go and get that shot. I'll get that shot. But one day I decided this was the day. So I got my son, grabbed my camera, and off we went. And so we pulled up to the park, and there was this picnic table of men who obviously congregated there, older gentlemen. And they kind of looked us up and down. And I realized in that moment it was a dog park. And I didn't have a dog. I had my son. And so I said, I'm just going to try to get a picture of him over there. And they said, OK. But the sidewalk ends right here. I had no clue what that meant. But I was like, all right, no big deal. So I get to the end of the sidewalk, and then I realize there's just poop all the way up to that bench. And I'm like, oh gosh, now I've got a table of men behind me watching to see if I'm really committed to the shot or not. And a son who's crying because the smell is intense. But we were committed. We ventured over. And the experience from that, to me, was you don't have to go far to explore new locations. There are some just right in your own backyard that you can definitely take advantage of. Okay, point number 2, embrace different genres. Back in 2016, as Mike kind of alluded when he did my introduction, I was in a rut. And I, at that point, went underwater with my camera. And it was all that it took to kind of bring me back to the initial feelings of infatuation that I had for photography. But as we experience those ruts, it can be really beneficial to look outside of your comfort zone and pick up your camera for different reasons. This is one of those shots that I was talking about the underwater images. But one of the other genres that I really love embracing is macro photography. It is one of those things that you literally have to stand still physically. You have to almost hold your breath in order to get that really steady shot. The focal, the depth of field is so narrow on these images. But one morning I came in and realized that we had frost the night before, and everything looked like it had just been picked up and dipped in sugar. And I wanted to capture that. So I grabbed my 105 macro lens, which honestly had a layer of dust on it because it had been collecting dust for quite a while, and went outside and captured this and remembered that there were other genres that could definitely get that love affair back. The other thing about macro photography is if you shoot nature, it's always changing. Your subject is always changing. So you go from winter, where there's frost on every petal, to spring, where you've got these buds that are blooming. One of the things that I realized after taking that frost image was that I needed to embrace opportunities to shoot macro more. So I would typically throw that lens in my bag and just keep it with me at all times. And then what I learned was that if I would get to my sessions, when I was shooting more family sessions, about 20 minutes early, typically those sessions were happening in a garden or a park or somewhere like that, I would get there a little bit early and embrace the nature around me, take those images, and it did two things. It allowed me to capture nature, and it also put me in a creative mindset to already be ready to shoot creatively when my clients arrived. Now, I will tell you, I am not a wildlife photographer, but, if the opportunity arises, I always say take it. I was sitting at my desk one day doing mundane work, and I was the only one there, and there was some rustling next to me over on the windowsill, and I looked up, and this guy had joined me. I can do bugs, but amphibians are kind of a different thing, and so I kind of panicked for a minute. I'm like, what are you doing? But before I exited him out of the building, I grabbed, again, my 105, and I took a picture of him. And it wasn't until I looked at it closely later, because I was kind of blinded by the unexpected visitor, I realized that he is missing a foot. So you never know who's going to show up on your doorstep, right? And you never know when a portrait opportunity might present itself. So being open to different genres is definitely a good thing. Okay, number 3, experiment with different focal lengths. I loved my 50 millimeter lens from the moment I started photography, those 6 months that I talked about a little bit earlier, for a very long time. But I began to realize that that might be attributing to the rut that I felt myself in. And so one day I rented a 16 millimeter, and captured this image. They were so close to me. I was on my stomach. They were close to me. I think she almost was like this far from hitting me when her foot came down. But any other lens would not have allowed me to capture this scene. Well, a 10 millimeter would, but anything less wide. This is a series of images that I wanted to show you all side by side, because when you experiment with focal lengths, you can get two very different stories. It's very important to be intentional in which focal lengths you're choosing. These were taken within minutes of each other. This image on the, what's that side to y'all? The left is the morning sun coming through the evergreens. And when I saw it, when I initially saw it and thought, I want to photograph that, it was a beautiful, beautiful morning sunrise. And so I went inside, I grabbed my 24 millimeter, and at that same time I grabbed the 105 as well, because I wanted to capture the same scene with two different lenses. Obviously, this is much wider. I set my aperture at f16, which created the sunburst effect through the trees, and I love it. It's a beautiful image. It shows the entire scene. However, on the flip side, by putting on my 105 millimeter lens, I was able to really zoom in on the pine needles of the tree and get a completely different effect. It's two very, very different looks created literally without me having to move my feet more than a 10-foot radius. Another thing that I do, so I kind of mentioned that my 105 had been collecting dust. I will often do an inventory of the lenses that I have sitting on my shelf and think, what have I not shot with recently? And the 70 to 200 lens that I have it's from a while ago. It was before the VR2 came out. So it's a bit finicky. Sometimes it will capture focus, sometimes it won't. That's been on my list to upgrade for a while. But I will see which lens I've used recently, and if I haven't used one, I will pull it off the shelf and I will take it on a field trip. And it will be the only lens that I put on my camera, and off we go. What that does is it forces a couple of things. It forces me to get creative with what I have on my camera and does not give me any opportunity to pull something else out of my bag that I might be more comfortable with. It also allows me to then begin incorporating that lens, because usually I will fall back in love with the lens that I've just not used for a while. So this image was captured with that 70 to 200 at 200 millimeters. You can't, I don't know if you can see it very well on the screen, but I was kind of behind trees. So you have that foreground bokeh as well as the creaminess of the background behind her. Okay. On the flip side, from the 70 to 200 is the 24 to 70. That lens always, whenever I pull it out of my bag, always reminds me of the power of zoom lenses. Like I said a minute ago, I am a lover of prime lenses. The 50 millimeter was my go-to, and then the subsequent ones that I embraced. But the 24 to 70 always reminds me of the importance of composition, because I'm no longer worried about moving with my feet, zooming with my feet. I can use the lens itself to do that work for me, so I'm more focused on the actual composition of the image. This one goes back to the 16 millimeter, and again, if I had not had this wide angle lens on my camera, I would not have been able to create it. I had the dome housing on my camera, and that allowed them to get right up close to me while still being a little bit away from, isn't it ridiculous? Away from the camera. They literally smacked, well, my oldest smacked her face in. The youngest would just want to be like her big sister. But if anything else had been on my camera, you would have maybe gotten their blurry nose, and that would have been it, and it would have been a tossed shot. But given the wide angle lens and the intentionality that goes behind it, we were able to capture that. Okay, this is one of my underwater images that was taken with the 16 millimeter again. I was laying completely on my back in the bottom of the pool, and they went up. They were almost to the surface. But again, having that intentional choice of putting the 16 millimeter on my lens, or my camera, I knew that I wanted that wide angle scene. If I had had a 24 on there, either their heads or their feet would have been chopped off, depending on how I had composed it. So just knowing the situations you're going into and being able to choose a lens based on that is very helpful. On the flip side, this is the same type of situation. I'm laying completely on my back and shooting up, but I have this 24 to 70 on my lens. So you can see how just that little change zooms us in that much more. Okay. Point number 4, examine and study light. I think one of the very biggest things that you can do to get yourself out of a creative rut is to begin shooting in light that feels unfamiliar to you, or just different from what you typically choose. A couple of years ago, I challenged myself to create light journals for 5 different spaces in my home. And what I did was I went to each of those locations 4 different times a day. Early morning, about an hour after sunrise, the sun came up, mid-morning, early afternoon, and then about an hour before the sun went down. And what I realized was in the moments or in the rooms where I thought the light did not change very much throughout the day, it actually drastically changed. And I was able to see, as I took the photographs of each of those moments, how that light progressed through the room. And through that, I then was able to make creative decisions based on it in spaces that I had easily at my ready, but I just had not used before. This is an example of that. It was a very, very cold winter day, but I wanted to create this warm image. So I thought, where can I go in my home that gets that really bold afternoon sun and capture that? And so it just happens to be the corner of our house where the sun sets in the winter. In that same vein, this is taken on the kitchen table, and through the light journaling, I realized there were 3 important components that I needed to be looking for when it came to light: quality, quantity, and direction. The quality of the light matters because either soft light or hard light is going to be very, very important when creating your images. It's going to give you a totally different feel. And then the direction of the light, it's coming in from the side. So if the light had been above, the light would have been very even. But because it's coming in through the side, we get that direction of it through the blinds here, and it's creating those very harsh shadows of the blinds. I slid the tulips into the scene because I wanted to have the comparison between the really harsh light and the softness of the petals. Okay. The other thing to remember when you're looking at and studying light is that it doesn't always have to be natural light. It can be ambient light, such as in this situation, where the only light source, because it's dark out, I mean, it's very late, is the backlight coming from the Storybook Circus sign. That is, and obviously from the surrounding light. But I know that I typically am like, I like my natural light. I don't want to go away from it. But in moments like this, being able to utilize the light that's available to you, otherwise the image wouldn't be taking place, is an important thing to do. Another situation that I typically would avoid is overhead light, or midday light, where it feels really, really bright, really bold. If you're taking a picture of anyone that doesn't have any kind of modifier over them, you often get the raccoon eyes here, the mustache under the nose, things of that nature. But it was a beautiful day at the beach, and I wanted to capture her here. I did have the boots with me because I thought maybe it would rain, and then I could take advantage of that. There was no rain in the forecast, so I made it work another way. But by putting the umbrella above her head, we were kind of diffusing that light through her. She's getting nice even light on her, and we're still getting the surrounding area of that midday light that you typically see, just the brightness of it. And then last but not least, under the lighting tip, I wanted to talk a little bit about backlight because, like I said, it is my favorite. It's my go-to. If I had my choice, it's what I would shoot in. It's also kind of difficult to get enough light on your subject's face because the light source is behind them, right? And so you've got them kind of standing in the shadows. One of the things that I have found that's really, really helpful is being aware as you're looking at the light source of the natural reflectors that are in front of your subject. So when I took this image, you have the light coming in from behind her and then a large white wall right behind me. So what that's doing is it's acting as an even larger reflector than I could possibly hold myself and freeing up a hand for me. So it's bouncing that back onto her. So again, just looking at the light, examining the light that's around and available to you can absolutely pull you out of a rut. Number 5, and this is the one that I would like to say that I have found 100% success with, but sometimes it's difficult. Expel social media's expectations. I think oftentimes social media is an amazing tool to connect with everyone in different parts of the world, but it also can put undue expectations on ourselves to create images that are going to get as many likes as possible, but not necessarily that are in line with your own personal creative soul. And so being aware of why you're taking images, knowing the why behind them, kind of goes a little bit further. This image in particular was one that I took last year, and it was one of my most favorite images that I had taken up to that point last year. And I posted it on Instagram, and it bombed. But because I was confident in it, and others might not like it, and that is so fine to me, but for me it brings me back to the moment where I captured it. This is a beach in Dubai, and it felt like a movie set. It was so beautiful. The fog was coming off of the ocean, or off of the sea, and it just felt like I had walked into a totally different scene. So I loved it. I embraced it. Social media didn't, and that's okay. That's okay. Establish appropriate expectations is my next tip. I think oftentimes we have this vision for where we want our career to go or for what we want to be able to accomplish with photography, and often we are getting ahead of ourselves in terms of doing all of the things that we need to get there. We see other people being successful immediately and thinking, well, they haven't worked that hard. You know, it's easy to see the highlight reel if you don't look for the cold image, you know, the cold stuff that people aren't showing. So establish appropriate expectations. I also mean that in regards to business. If you're running a business, if you're taking clients and you are constantly creating work for them, you leave yourself with very little time to be creative on your own. You have a client that you are creating something for, and you have to constantly keep that in mind. But if you, again, set reasonable expectations and carve out a time for you to be creative, you can invest that back into your own work and make work that is in line with what you want to do. Number 7, evolve through education. Now, all of you are here, so this is basically like preaching to the choir, right? We all go to conferences to learn and to further our growth. Even the most seasoned photographers have stuff they can learn, right? I know I have a ton of stuff that I could still learn. And I think that by embracing that, there's so many different avenues to learning. You can jump on YouTube and watch a tutorial for free and get exposed to content that you otherwise would not have the opportunity to learn. So embracing that. There's also online workshops, all different types of things that will help expose you to different ideas. Number 8, embrace inspiration through other art forms. And this could be anything that you pull inspiration from. I loved the art of the balls in this image and how it mimicked the setting sun. But that can be anything. A lot of times when I'm shooting an image, I hear a song in my head, which might make me sound crazy, but that's okay. As I was shooting this image, she had come out in this bathing suit that kind of had a ruffly tutu on it, and all I could hear was Elton John's Tiny Dancer. And every time I look at it, it plays in my head, just on a loop. Same thing with this one. Lady Gaga's I'm Off the Deep End, Watch as I Dive In. It's just a constant loop. And so oftentimes I'll be driving down the road, and it's one of those things where you get to your destination, you're like, how did I get here? Because all I've been thinking about are the lyrics that are playing over the radio. In that same vein, pulling inspiration from artists that you love. When Adele released Hello a few years back, there was an image that accompanied it, and it was her on a phone, an old rotary dial phone, and I thought, oh, I love that. She had the split lighting down her face, and I thought, I'm going to recreate that. And so I did with myself and my kids' play phone from the playroom, because I didn't have an actual phone. But finding that inspiration wherever it comes from and opening yourself up to that is such a great thing that you can do for feeling creative. The last thing I want to say is a lot of times with cinematography, you can pull a lot of inspiration through the different ways that directors see their own sets and the way that they go about shooting certain things. Every year I'm not a super huge editor. I don't often add elements to my images that aren't already present. But every year, once a year, I give myself the opportunity to do that at Halloween. And so we will pick a scene from a movie. Last year it was Wizard of Oz. The year before that it was Peter Pan. But we will pull from that, and I will just grab inspiration wherever I can based on the cinematography. Number 9, and this might be the most important one yet. Extend your why. If you are feeling like you're in a creative rut and that you can't creatively make work for yourself that's making you happy, reach out to somebody who can. Every year I partner with the Rally Foundation, which is a childhood cancer organization, and that was what the little girl before was from as well. A childhood cancer organization, and 94 cents on every dollar that they raise goes directly to the researchers researching cancer treatments for children. But it is by far the most important work that I do every year, because otherwise it's a way to get back and get out of my own head and to realize that the creative rut that I think I'm in is really not there, that it's a self-imposed thing. And by giving to other people and to giving to organizations where they truly rely on you for that type of donation, it pulls you back. It pulls you back to reality. All right. Last but not least, and thank you all for sticking around for all 10 points. Number 10, exhale and escape when necessary. I think that this is vitally important because we can feel very, very burnt out. And we can try all 9 of the things that I've talked about before this, and we can still feel burnt out. And it's important to say when enough's enough that you need to put down your camera. Because when we put down our camera and we actually experience things, we can fully experience them, which can then weave its way back into our photography in a different way. So, I hope that you all feel inspired. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for having me. If you have any questions or comments, I would be so open to hearing them. You can find me on Instagram at Elizabeth Blank. I'm also going to try to post a light journal in the next day or two in my Instagram stories so that you all can see exactly what that looks like for me and what information I was pulling from that. So thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your conference.
Elizabeth Blank, thank you so much. What a great program. That's going to conclude our day here for day 2. We'll be right back here again.